Hello, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. How is everybody? So, where were we? Curses, home and abroad. Back in the book. Let's pick up where I left off. The difficulty was that though one could trap them like animals, transport them in pens, work them alongside an ass or a horse, and beat them both with the same stick, stable them and starve them, they remained, despite their black skins and curly hair, quite invincibly human beings, with the intelligence and resentments of human beings. To cow them into the necessary docility and acceptance necessitated a regime of calculated brutality and terrorism. And it is this that explains the unusual spectacle of property owners apparent careless and preserving their property. Apparent careless of preserving their property, they had first to ensure their own safety. For the least fault, the slaves received the harshest punishment. In 1685, the Negro Code authorized whipping, and in 1702, one colonist, a marquis, thought any punishment which demanded more than 100 blows of the whip was serious enough to be handed over to the authorities. Later, the number was fixed at 39 and raised to 50, but the colonists paid no attention to these regulations, and slaves were not unfrequently whipped to death. The whip was not always an ordinary cane or wooden cord, as the code demanded. Sometimes it was replaced by the rigorous or thick thong of cowhide, or by the lianes, local groves of reeds, supple and pliant like whalebone. The slaves received the whip with more certainty and regularity than they received their food. It was the incentive to work and the guardian of discipline. But there was no ingenuity that fear or deprived imagination could devise what was not employed to break their spirit and satisfy the lusts and resentment of their owners and guardians. Irons on their feet and blocks of wood that the slaves had to drag behind them wherever they went, the thin tin plate mask designed to prevent the slaves from eating the sugar cane, the iron collar. Deuteronomy 28:48. Therefore you shall serve your enemies, whom the Lord shall send against you in hunger and thirst, in nakedness and in want of all things. He will put an yoke of iron upon your neck until he has destroyed you. A thin tin plate designed to prevent the slaves from eating the sugar cane, the iron collar. Whipping was interrupted in order to pass a piece of hot wood on the buttocks of the victim. Salt, pepper, citron, cinders, aloes, and the hot ashes were poured onto their bleeding wounds. Mutilations were common, limbs, ears, and sometimes private parts, to deprive them of the pleasures which they could indulge without expense. Their masters poured burning wax on their arms and hands and shoulders, emptied the boiling cane sugar over their heads, burnt them alive, roasted them on slow fires, filled them with gunpowder, and blew them up with a match, buried them up to the neck, and smearing their heads with sugar that the flies might devour them, fastened them near to nests of ants or wasps, made them eat their excrement, drink their urine, and lick the saliva of other slaves. One colonist was well known in moments of anger to throw himself on his slaves and stick his teeth into their flesh. Buried them up to their necks and smeared their heads with sugar that the flies might devour them. You see, that has been used in movies as just like funny passing things. I remember seeing these things. What's that? Jackie Chan and Owen Wilson. I swear it's in that. And it might even be in Wild Wild West as well. I've seen this in a couple of comedy films where they bury them up to their heads. It's hard, like, knowing too much. Like, it's hard. It is really hard. Where those Were those tortures so well authenticated, habitual, or were they merely isolated incidents, the extravagances of a few half-crazed colonists? Impossible as it is to substantiate hundreds of cases, yet all the evidence shows that these bestial practices were normal features of slave life. The torture of the whip, for instance, had 1,000 refinements, but there were regular varieties that had special names. So commonly so commonly were they. When the hands and arms were tied to 4 posts on the ground, the slave said to undergo the 4 posts. If the slave was tied to a ladder, it was the torture of the ladder. If he was suspended by 4 limbs, it was the hammock, etc. The pregnant woman was not spared. Her 4 posts. A hole was dug in the earth to accommodate the unborn child. The torture of the collar was specially reserved for women who were suspected of abortion, and the collar never left their necks until they had produced a child. The blowing up of a slave had its own name: to burn a little powder in the arse of a nigger. Obviously, this was no freak, but a recognized practice. The blowing up of a slave had its own name: to burn a little powder in the arse of a nigger. Obviously, this was no freak, but a recognized practice. After an exhaustive examination, the best that the Diversier can say is that there were good masters and there were bad, and his impression, but only an impression, is that the former were more numerous than the latter. There are and always will be some who, ashamed of the behavior of their ancestors, try to prove that slavery was not so bad after all, that its evils and its cruelty were the exaggerations of propagandists and not the habitual lot of slaves. Men will say and accept anything in order to foster national pride or to soothe a troubled conscience. Undoubtedly, there were kind masters who did not indulge in these refinements of cruelty, and whose slaves merely suffered overwork, undernourishment, and the whip. But the slaves in San Domingo could not replenish their number by reproduction. After that dreaded journey across the ocean, a woman was usually sterile for 2 years. The life in San Domingo killed them off fast. The planters deliberately worked them to death rather than wait for children to grow up. No regard for young or old. But the professional whitewashers are assisted by the writings of a few contemporary observers who describe scenes of idyllic beauty. One of these was Valblanc, whom we shall meet again, and whose testimony we'll understand better when we know more of him. In his memoirs, he shows us a plantation on which there were no prisons, no dungeons, no punishments to speak of. If the slaves were naked, the climate was as not to render this an evil, and those who complained forgot the perfectly disgusting rags that were so often seen in France. The slaves were exempt from unhealthy, fatiguing, dangerous work as was performed by the workers in Europe. They did not have to descend into the bowels of the earth, nor dig deep into its pits. They did not construct subterranean galleys. They did not work in the factories where French workers breathed deadly infected air. They did not mount elevated roofs. And they did not carry enormous burdens. The slaves, he concluded, had light work to do and were very happy to do it. Valblanc, in Saint Domingo, so sympathetic to the sorrows of labour in France, had to fly from Paris in August 1792 to escape the wrath of the French workers. You see, things got so bad in France, the revolution just exploded, and they were after people. They were after people. You see, these masters, these men behind the curtain, this is why they give us politicians and make us believe that they're in charge. Because when things kick off, heads roll. When the people have had enough, they want blood. And you see them now throwing us morsels, you know. When we want to go right to the top, we want everybody involved. We don't want just some individual who's been caught. We know this is a whole racket going on. These guys fled. They flee. You see, the people were being abused in France. People were being abused everywhere. And that's where revolutions come from. These people, they study these things carefully. And in times like this, times like today, they're watching people very closely, very hard to look for leaders, people who are coming into groups, if it's not their own organized groups, so they can snuff it out before it even starts. Start campaigns on people. The following, the gang stalking, the street theatre, making people do stupid things if they have a bit of a temper so they can throw them in jail. Discrediting people. No. So we'll never get to see who's really ruling, because then we know exactly who to go for. It's times like after these revolutions, the world changed again. And after certain scandals, you see how the press changed. Every time they know what bases to cover after certain things happened. What's being covered right now? Social media. That base is being covered and infiltrated. You can't go down the rabbit hole now. There's no rabbit hole on Twitter and stuff like that. It's the old rabbit hole. All the real keyboard warriors, all the truth tellers, they have to go to other platforms. Because the main ones, it's like I've had to delete stuff and my stuff has been removed. For mainly talking about, 2021. Removed. Valblanc in Saint Domingo, so sympathetic to the sorrows of labour in France, had to fly from Paris in August 1792 to escape the wrath of the French workers. Malouet, who was an official in the colonies and fellow reactionary of Valblanc against all change in the colonies, also sought to give some ideas of the privileges of slavery. The first he notes is that the slave, on attaining his majority, begins to enjoy the pleasures of love, and his master has no interest in preventing the indulgence of his taste. To such impertinent follies that can be to such impertinent follies can the defense of property drive even an intellectual man supposed in his time to be sympathetic towards the blacks. The majority of the slaves accommodated themselves to this unceasing brutality by a profound fatalism and a wooden stupidity before their masters. "Why do you treat your mule in that way?" asked the colonist of a carter. When I do not work, I am beaten. When he does not work, I beat him. He is my Negro. One old Negro, having lost one of his ears and contemned to lose another, begged a governor to spare it, for if for if for if that too was cut off, he would have nowhere to put his stump of cigarette. That's not funny. I'm not laughing at that. I'm laughing at the fact that the brother is concerned more about his cigarette than his ear. That's what smoking does to you. But also, this brother's probably been beaten so many times that he's probably got no nerves in his back anymore. And he's more concerned, where am I going to put my cigarette? I'm going to cut off my other ear. A slave sent by his master into his neighbour's garden to steal is caught and brought back to the man who had only a few minutes before dispatched him on the errand. The master orders him a punishment of 100 lashes, to which the slave submits without a murmur. When caught in error, they persisted in denial with the same fatalistic stupidity. A slave is accused of stealing a pigeon. He denies it. The pigeon is discovered hidden in his shirt. Well, look at that pigeon. It take my shirt for a nest. Through the shirt of another, a master can feel the potatoes which he denies he has stolen. They are not potatoes, he says. They are stones. They are not potatoes, they are stones. He is undressed and the potatoes fall to the ground. Master, the devil is wicked. Put stones and look, you find potatoes. Oh, man. It's not funny, but I'm just laughing at the fact that just the wickedness, and it's a coping mechanism, basically. You know? He was sent by his masters to steal from another dude's garden potatoes or a pigeon or whatever. Now, he cannot say, oh, my master sent me. He can't say his master will batter him. But he's been caught red-handed, so he has to lie to deny it. He knows it's foolish, but he can't say, oh, yeah. What can he say? So it's just like a game being played, and just like, that's what I'm laughing at. It's just barefaced lying. And then he has to take the beating for it because he's been caught. And then his master's like, well, I didn't send him, the mentalities. This is why I'm so happy to be wide awake, because I see it all. I see it. I hear it all now. You hear it all. It's much more sophisticated and complicated, but you hear it, you see it, you look in your own life and you think, okay. Sometimes you just gotta laugh because you know the future now. You know it's bright. Everything's revealed. And And people can clamber all they like to make excuses and deny it, as they have done and that historians have done. And you just laugh at them because it's... I've been through the process of grieving and weeping and being angry about this kind of stuff. On holidays, when not working on their private lots or dancing, they sat for hours in front of their huts, giving no sign of life. You can imagine that, the brutality they go through day and night and blah, blah, blah. Now they're estranged. They're kind of estranged. Like, it depends what kind of master you had and what kind of brutalities and what the taskmaster's like. And wives and husbands, children and parents were separated at the will of the master, and a father and son would meet after many years and give no greeting or sign of emotion. Deuteronomy 28:41. Thou shalt beget sons and daughters, but thou shalt not enjoy them, for they shall go into captivity. There are other examples of taking sons and daughters away, but just use another one for an example. Many slaves could never be got to stir at all. What's that? Sorry, just distracted by something. Many slaves could not be got to stir at all unless they were whipped. Suicide was a common habit, and such was their disregard for life that they often killed themselves, not for personal reasons, but in order to spite their owner. Well, I said at the end of the last video, what else is there for us but this hope of this Bible? We can see it's true. We can see the word of the Most High comes true. It comes to pass. I don't need to see a miracle when the Most High has spoken. All the way back in the days of Moses. And it came to pass again and again and again. It says if we do not stick to these laws, statutes, and commandments, this will happen to us. And you see, all throughout the ages, we go in and out of captivity. So what's there not to believe? If you don't believe this, what else is there for our future? Now, when you believe in the Most High, suicide is not an option. It's not an option. But without the Most High, I'm not going through all this again. So this is perfectly understandable, how people fought to the death, how people threw themselves off the ships, and relief was drowning. And there's more, it gets worse. Killed themselves. Such disregard for life, they often killed themselves, not for personal reasons, but in order to spite their owner. Life was hard, and death, they believed, meant not only release, but a return to Africa. Those who wished to believe and to convince the world that the slaves were half human brutes, fit for nothing else but slavery, but could find ample evidence for their faith, and in nothing so much as in this homicidal mania of the slaves. So now they're using it against them. We're getting to that as well, but now they're using it against them because of who they are. Their life, their whole existence has been beaten out of them, and now all their characteristics is being used against them because they kill themselves. They're now using it against them. Those who wished to believe and to convince the world that the slaves were half human brutes, fit for nothing else but slavery, could find ample evidence for their faith, and in nothing so much as in the homicidal mania of the slaves. Poison was their method. A mistress would poison a rival to retain the valuable affections of her inconstant owner. So now, to make them lives easier for themselves, my master used to enjoy me at night and I used to get special privileges. Now he's after this younger girl, more pretty. I'm gonna poison her. A discarded mistress would poison master, wife, children, and slaves. No fury like a woman scorned. A slave robbed of his wife by one of his masters would poison him. Deuteronomy 28:30. Thou shalt betroth a wife, and another man shall lie with her. A slave robbed of his wife by one of his masters would poison him, and this was one of the most frequent causes of poisoning. If a planter conceived a passion for a young slave, her mother would poison his wife with the idea of placing her daughter at the head of the household. The slaves would poison younger children of a master in order to ensure the plantation succeeded to one son. By this means, they prevented the plantation being broken up and the gang dispersed. So inheritance, we're talking inheritance now. So they would poison the other kids, so just the one son would get that inheritance, and now it's his plantation, rather than all the kids wanting to sell the plantation so they can all have their inheritance. You see, these things I think about when brothers want to talk about multiple wives. You know, I always think, what would Yeshua say? What would Yeshua say? Because a lot of brothers, they think, oh, women should shut up about it, and then they try and force it. Oh, get used to it. This is the Most High. Oh, it's perfectly fine. It's in the Bible and blah, blah, blah. What would Yeshua say? I think, if I can take this liberty, which, let me just say, let me not say this is what I think he would say, but would he say? Because we all read the Bible, we know how he talks. Would he ask us a question? If we went to Yeshua with a question, a band of men go to Yeshua with a question about multiple wives, would he ask us the question? What would you want for your sister? What would you want for your daughter? And it comes to the question of multiple wives. What would you want for your baby sister? What would you want for your daughter? Would you want her to have one loving husband? Or would you want her to be a wife of many? One of a few wives? This is what we have to ask ourselves when brothers got this fixed thing in their mind about multiple wives. Plus, speaking of inheritance, we learn about this thing where, say, the head wife, the first child, you've got maybe 2 kids. And then from the other wives, the second wife, you've got 4. And then the other wives, you've got more. When you die and the question of inheritance comes up, isn't it your own responsibility and your own fault if those kids are now warring with each other, trying to kill each other for the inheritance? Because a lot of dudes are in their flesh when they think about multiple wives. But would Yeshua say, it was your choice, and then now you deal with it? And the conflict between the wives as well. Conflict between the lives that filters down to the children. You know, even first siblings, immediate family, brothers and sisters fall out, have feuds, but half brothers and sisters, especially when money comes into it, it's all on your head if you insist on this multiple wives business. Because as you can see here, the slaves were poisoning, making sure the inheritance goes to one son. And maybe it's the favourite son. Maybe saying, nah, that brother is wicked. It's best that the plantation goes to this one because this one's more reasonable. This one has a heart at least. That guy is wicked. And if he inherits the plantation, our children are going to be under him. And he's a monster. Let's poison him. Where was I? By this means they prevented the plantation being broken up and by the gang and the gang being dispersed. On certain plantations the slaves decimated their number by poison so as to keep the number of slaves small and prevented their masters from embarking on larger schemes which would increase the work. For this reason, a slave would poison his wife. Another would poison his children. And a Negro nurse declared in court that for years she had poisoned every child that she brought into the world. Nurses employed in hospitals poisoned sick soldiers to rid themselves of unpleasant work. The slaves would even poison the property of a master whom they loved. He was going away. They poisoned cows, horses, and mules. The plantation was thrown into disorder, and the beloved master was compelled to remain. You never know who the taskmasters was, who the eldest son was. These people could have been wicked. They don't want the master. He's the only one keeping them in control. They don't want some manager who they don't know to take the place of the master while he's off on holiday and to do horrid things. Horrid things are already happening to them, possibly. But to have a stranger from outside just come and just have his wicked way with everyone, yeah. Deep. Deep. Reading things like this just helps me bring the words off the pages of this Bible and helps me see the future better and to contemplate certain things in reality. Relationships. The most dreadful of all this cold-blooded murder was, however, the jaw sickness, a disease which attacked children only. In the first few days of their existence, their jaws were closed to such an extent that it was impossible to open them and to get anything down, with the result that they died of hunger. It was not a natural disease and never attacked children delivered by white women. The Negro midwives alone could cause it, and it is believed that they performed some simple operation on the newly born child which resulted in the jaw sickness. Whatever the method, this disease caused the death of nearly one third of the children born on the plantations. What was the intellectual level of the slaves? The planters, hating them, called them by every opprobrious name. The Negroes, says the memoir published in 1789, are unjust, cruel, barbarous, half-human, treacherous, deceitful, thieves, drunkards, proud, lazy, unclean, shameless, jealous to fury, and cowards. Deuteronomy 28:37. Byword, an amazement. You shall become an amazement, a proverb, and a byword among all the peoples to which the Lord will lead you. $17.89, eh? So that's over 30 years in. No? 1720. In the beginning, the 47,000 in 1720 had grown. So from 1720 to 1789. So we're on to grandchildren now. So through all that torture and all the madness and all the punishment and all, this is who they are now. And slavery is only, 160 years ago. And people still label us today. It's the same. These conditions made us that way, and then they use it against us. This is why I say our wounds are deep. It was by sentiments such as these that they strove to justify the abominable cruelties they practiced, and they took great pains that the Negro should remain the brute beast that they wanted him to be. The safety of the whites demands that we keep the Negroes in the most profound ignorance. The safety of the whites demands that we keep the Negroes in the most profound ignorance. I have reached the stage of believing firmly that one must treat the Negroes as one treats beasts. Such is the opinion of the governor of Martinique in a letter addressed to the minister, and such was the opinion of all colonists, except for the Jews, who spared no energy in making Israelites of their slaves. You see, they knew, man, they knew. And that just opened my mind to say, he did not know what he was writing. Because remember, I asked the question before when we were going through the curses. I'm like, did this guy know what he was writing? Did he know? He did not know what he was writing, but yet it's so evident. for lack of a better word, except for the Jews who spared no energy in making Israelites of their slaves. The majority of the colonists religiously kept all instruction, religious or otherwise, away from the slaves. Obviously different in America. Excuse me, this is the French we're talking about here, but obviously different in America and the Caribbean, where some people didn't want to, but some people did. They used that slave Bible. We know. Naturally, there were all types of men among them, ranging from native chieftains, as was the father of Toussaint Louverture, the men who had been slaves in their own country. To men who had been slaves in their own country. The Creole Negro was more docile than the slave who had been born in Africa. Some said he was more intelligent. Others doubted that there was much difference, though the Creole slave knew the language and was more familiar with his surroundings and his work. Yet those who took the trouble to observe them away from their masters and in their intercourse with each other did not fail to see that remarkable liveliness and intellect and vivacity of spirit which so distinguished their descendants in the West Indies today. Father DEUT, priest, who knew them well, noted their secret pride and feeling of superiority to their masters, the difference between their behavior before their masters and when they were by themselves. De Wimpfen, an exceptionally observant and able traveller, was also astonished at this dual personality of the slaves. One has to hear with what warmth and with what volubility, and at the same time with what precision of ideas and accuracy of judgment this creature, heavily and taciturn. Taciturn is like being meek, quiet, like reserved. One has to hear with what warmth and with what volubility, and at that same time with what precision of ideas and accuracy of judgment this creature, heavy and taciturn all day, now squatting before his fire, tells stories, talks, gesticulates, argues, passes opinions, approves or condemns both his master and everyone who surrounds him. It was his intelligence which refused to be crushed. These latent possibilities that frightened the colonists, as it frightens the whites in Africa today. No species of men has more intelligence, wrote Hillard de Herbertuil, a colonist in 1784, and his book was banned. His book was banned for saying that. It was with intelligence which he refused to be crushed, these latent possibilities that frighten the colonists, as it frightens the whites in Africa today. No species of men has more intelligence. But one does not need education or encouragement to cherish the dream of freedom. At their midnight celebrations of voodoo, their African cult, they danced, they sang, usually this favorite song. Now, I'm not going to repeat this little tune, this little verse, which they say, just in case it is voodoo. But as we know, our old ancient practices from the motherland. They just called voodoo anyway, because of course they're Christians now, and you could only like cross yourself and sit and pray quietly. They never understood. In these times, all the work of their wicked fathers from the last 200 years had been done. We had been erased from history. We had been wiped away from the Bible. The Bible was now theirs. They believed they were the children of Israel, especially colonizing these new lands, going to the promised land. They believed it was them, you know. That was the wicked work of their fathers. And reading about all the conquerings in Joshua and everything, they thought it was them. And this is why I say these people, they did believe they were the right hand of God. But the evil one had done his work with them. We swear to destroy the whites and all they possess. Let us die rather than fail to keep this vow. The colonists knew this song and tried to stamp it out, and the voodoo cult with which it was linked, in vain. For over 200 years the slaves sang it at their meetings, as the Jews in Babylon sang of Zion, and the Bantu today sing in secret the national anthem of Africa. You see, boom, that's how I know. They just lump everything in as voodoo. Nobody's doubting voodoo. Even the Bible said we were into wicked practices, wicked stuff. But they threw our own Hebrew practices in with the voodoo. In with voodoo. It's like in old times what they did with the witches. Women were witches, and they were in their own secret circles. But any woman even associated, even seen with them, was accused of being a witch. And they were like, drown her, like throw her in the lake. If she drowns, she's innocent. If she floats, burn her. Nuts. Nuts. So that's how I know. That's how I know. He didn't know what he was writing. And I reckon these Ashkenazi, they knew. They've always known. They knew. They've known all over time. They were fully involved. They've always been there, and even to this day, they're there. I don't know what it's like in America, but over here in London, there's black community, and then there's their set apart community not far away. Literally next door. What else was I gonna say? Voodoo, blah blah blah. Yeah, so everyone knows about voodoo, and everyone likes to throw voodoo in there. Voodoo in Haiti, voodoo in Nigeria. Voodoo, labouring voodoo. But nobody talks about, nobody likes to talk about, let me say without actually saying, Dracula country. Nobody talks about Dracula country and these people with the red string on their wrists. Nobody likes to talk about that. Nobody likes to go into that. Keep your eyes peeled. You see it on the television, you see it on celebrities. These people with the red string, bruv. They will tell you, oh, it's just to keep spirits away. And then they will tell you, oh, it's because it's a love thing. But dig deep. You do the research. I'm done telling people, because you tell people and they don't believe. All the slaves, however, did not undergo this regime. This was a small, privileged caste. Here we go. The foreman of the gangs coachmen, cooks, butlers, maids, nurses, female companions, and other house servants. These repaid their kind treatment and comparatively easy life with a strong attachment to their masters, and have thus enabled Tory historians, Regius professors, and sentimentalists to present plantation slavery as a patriarchal relation between master and slave, permeated with the voices of their masters and mistresses. The upper servants gave themselves airs and despised the slaves of the field. Dressed in cast-off silks and brocades, they gave balls in which, like trained monkeys, they danced minuets and quadrilles and bowed and curtsied in the fashion of the Versailles. But a few of these used their position to cultivate themselves, to gain little education, to learn all they could. The leaders of a revolution are usually those who have been able to profit by the cultural advantages of the system they are attacking. Use their privileges and advantages of the system they are attacking, and the San Domingo Revolution was no exception to this rule. You see, this is what I bet they've been watching all the intellectuals, they've been watching all the smart Negroes over this time, over this period, watching closely. They're expecting, as they know how the 400 years period was coming, they've been watching carefully, watching the intellectuals, watching the politicians, watching the scientists, watching the smart people. But Father Yah works in mysterious ways. It wasn't them who were awakening. It's ordinary street youths like us. Former street youths, the kids who were in trouble at school, the insolent, former prisoners, some intellectuals, some nerds, but as you see, most of us, we're just average working class brothers and sisters. We're the ones who awakened. You didn't count on that. And that's where you're just baffled and perplexed. And that also strikes fear, especially in the Ashkenazi. Because, let me shut that down right there. Christoph Edwards. Christoph afterwards, Emperor of Haiti. Christoph, afterwards Emperor of Haiti, was a slave, a waiter in a public hotel at Cap François, where he made use of his opportunities to gain a knowledge of men and of the world. Toussaint Louverture also belonged to this small and privileged caste. His father, son of a petty chieftain in Africa, was captured in war, sold as a slave, and made the journey in a slave ship. He was bought by a colonist of some sensibility, who, recognizing that this Negro was an unusual person, allowed him a certain liberty on the plantation and the use of 5 slaves to cultivate a plot of land. He became a Catholic, married a woman who was both beautiful and good, and Toussaint was the eldest of 8 children. Near to the household lived an old Negro, Pierre Baptiste, remarkable for his integrity of character and a smattering of knowledge. The Negroes spake a debased French known as Creole, but Pierre knew French, also a little Latin and a little geometry which he had learned from his missionary. Pierre Baptiste became Toussaint's godfather and taught his godson the rudiments of French. Using the services of the Catholic Church, he instructed him also in the rudiments of Latin. Toussaint learned also to draw. The young slaves had the care of the flocks and herds, and this was Toussaint's early occupation. But his father, like many other Africans, had some knowledge of medical plants and taught Toussaint what he knew. The elements of an education, his knowledge of herbs, his unusual intelligence singled him out, and he was made coachman to his master. This brought him further means of comfort and self-education. Ultimately, he was made steward of all the livestock on the estate, a responsible post which was usually held by a white man. If Toussaint's genius came from where genius comes, yet circumstances conspired to give him exceptional parents, friends, and a kind master. And also, speaking of these guys, the house servants, the kind of treatment, repaid their kind treatment and comparatively easy life with a strong religious professors and sentiments to present plantation slavery as a patriarchal blessing. Permeated with the vices of their masters and mistress, the upper servants gave themselves airs and despised the slaves of the field, dressed in cast-offs and silks and brocades, and went to dances and bowed and curtsies and and were imitating the vassals. We know who they are today, aren't we? Don't we? We know who they are. And this is why I got angry with David Lammy. They will do anything, say anything. Like, So, I know exactly what I'm going to title this one. Let's go back to abroad. Curses home and abroad. Curses curses at home. Exterminate all the brutes. Curses abroad. Black Jacobins in Haiti. Where do I start? Okay, let's just start here. At a Catholic mission, right there, yeah. Alright, I can squeeze this in quickly. But the book I saved from destruction, In the Shade of the Palms, 1907, was written by a missionary, Edward Wilhelm Schaubaum. He arrived in the Congo on July 31st, 1892. On August 20th, he saw his first corpse. In his diary, we see him on his travels by steamer up the Congo to choose a suitable place for his mission station. As clearly as his first day on board, he witnesses a flogging with the hippo hide whip. Lieutenant Pagels had so warmly recommended all the white men on board are in agreement. Pagels had warmly recommended the flogging of this captive. All the white men on board were in agreement. Only the whip can civilize the black. At a Catholic mission, they have 300 boys taken prisoner during the war between state and the natives. They were now to be handed over to the state or to be trained as soldiers, child soldiers. Where do you think they got that from? The steamer is delayed while on one of the boys is captured. He is bound to the steam engine where the heat is greatest, Schaubaum notes. The captain often showed the boy the cheat sheet. which is a vicious whip basically, but made him wait all day before letting him taste it. Show the boy the whip, hang it up. He's just waiting for the whipping. However, the moment of suffering came. I tried to count the lashes and think they were about 60, apart from the kicks to his head and back. The captain smiled with satisfaction when he saw the boy's thin garb soaked with blood. The boy lay there on the deck in his torment, wriggling like a worm. And every time the captain or one of the trading agents passed him by, he was given a kick or several. I had to witness this in silence. At dinner, they talked of their exploits concerning the treatment of the blacks. They mentioned one of their equals who had flogged 3 of his men so mercilessly that they had died as a result. This was reckoned to be valor, one of them said. The best of them is not too good to die like a pig. And it just goes on and on and on and on and on and on. The cheat of raw hippo hide, especially a new one, trimmed like a corkscrew with the edges of a knife blade, is a terrible weapon, and a few blows bring blood. Not more than 25 blows should be given unless the offence is very serious. Though we persuade ourselves that the African skin is very tough, it needs an extraordinary constitution to withstand the terrible punishment of 100 blows. Generally, the victim is in a state of insensibility after 25 or 30 blows. At the first blow, he yells abominably, then quiets down, and is a mere groaning, quivering body till the operation is over. It is bad enough, the flogging of men, but far worse this punishment inflicted on women and children. Small boys of 10 or 12 with excitable, hot-tempered masters are often mostly harshly treated. I consciously believe that a man who receives 100 blows is often nearly killed, and his spirit is broken for life. So here we are, like one from the beginning, a boy, and the guy lost count at 60. That's not even mentioning the kicking in the back and head. And then after the beating, every time somebody walks past him, they're kicking. Oh, crikey. It's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot. Well, here it is. I found it. Let me just finish up on this. An experienced traveller in Africa had advised Lieutenant Pagels to take the chichot as his best friend, the whip made of raw hippopotamus hide, which at every blow slashes blood wounds. It may sound cruel to European ears, said Pagels, but he knew from experience that it was true. Particularly important was to seem coldly unmoved while administering a flogging. Particularly important was to seem coldly unmoved while administering a flogging. If you have to order physical punishment to a savage, Have this punishment carried out with not a muscle in your face betraying your feelings. Lieutenant Gleerup relates on his report how he flogged his bearers until he passed out in an attack of fever. Then, how tenderly the recently flogged men cared for him, covering him with their white cloths and looking after him as if he were a child, and how he lay with his head in the lap of one of the men while another ran down to the steep valley to fetch water for him, so that he could soon be recovered and he was once again able to wield the whip. But only individual blacks behaved this way. The complete opposite was true of the savage in general. Pagels had tried in vain to find a single good side to the savage. Should I be at death's door and a glass of water were enough to save my life, no savage would bring me that water if I could not pay him for his trouble. Morality, love, friendship, all such things are lacking in the savage, said Pagels. The savage respects nothing but brute strength. He regards friendliness as stupidity. So one should never show a savage any friendship. It's deep. Deuteronomy 28:15, but it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of Father Yah thy Elohim, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. And the Father Yah shall make thee the head and not the tail. Okay, that's the blessings. Read Deuteronomy. So that was for you, Sylvia. That day I met you on the high street and we had a good chat, and I was trying to bring out some history to you and the other brother you were with from the church, and I may seemed a bit passionate and a bit overbearing, but I just wanted you to show you, I hope you're listening by the way, I just wanted to show you that it's more than just going up to people on the street and saying, did you know that Jesus loves you, and handing out tracts, the Christian ways and blah blah blah, because that's been going on for decades, for centuries in some case, and people are numb to it. People have heard it all before. It's our job as Israelites to know this book, to explain to us who we are and how we need to come back to the law, statutes and commandments, but also to explain to Gentiles, to the nations, especially the West, what they need to repent for. Because you may make the arguments, oh, The Most High said this in Deuteronomy 28 and blah blah blah. Like I said before, nobody's gonna tell you that, oh, it's okay, God made you do it, because he knew. He said, I will hand you over to a nation of fierce countenance. That's going to be the title of this message. The noise campaign going on, can you hear it? Those who know, you know. I hear it, I see it in your videos as well. But yeah, basically, where was I? See, they free. Oh man. Yes, nobody's gonna say that, because obviously it wasn't just us. It wasn't just us. The Most High knew who you were. And like I say, I'm always fascinated. My mind is blown all the time by the divine plan. So we have one nation, one people who are angry at all this. They've had no pride, like just pure shame and brutality. They've been trodden down. But to lift their heads, they need to accept who they are, and that the captivities are their fault. Deuteronomy 28 is all laid out. We came away from the commandments, and that's what happens when you do this. And you can see many of us don't want to accept that. We don't want to be who we are. But on the other hand, you have this other nation. Like I said, our history is intertwined. Our fates are intertwined. You have these other nations who have all the pride. You know, all the pride and let me just say that. I could go on with other words, but let me just keep it. But they need to actually come down low and humble themselves. And recognize the Most High for who he is. It just blows my mind all the time. All the time. No pride at all, no shame, which in fact we do have so much history and things to be proud of, but it was taken away. And for all these centuries we've just been down low, but now we can lift our heads and be saved, be who we are. And the other nations have to come down and admit the sins, all the killing, and humble themselves to be saved. And that's why, to those Gentiles who are out there who are doing this and they're 100% book and they're in the true truth, I commend them, I swear, medal. But in both nations, most people don't want to do it. They can't humble themselves. And so much for so few. Destiny is all.